Every year, people spend billions of dollars on travel and tourism in Canada. For people with disabilities, just getting in the door to spend their travel money can be a real struggle. Hello and welcome to DNet, the Disability Network. I'm Joe Coughlin. People with restricted physical mobility make up a market of potential tourists that is in a state of rapid growth. We'll find out if it's a market that gets the attention it deserves later in the show. We'll also look at a hotel room that comes very close to being a model of accessibility. And we'll show you what this gizmo does. But first, here's this week's roundup of disability stories from across the country. A conference on tourism for disabled persons has been told that the tourist and travel industry is missing out on a large potential market. That claim was made by Alain Charette, president of CAROL, the Association for Development of Tourism for Handicapped People in Quebec.
I think that more and more disabled person and less mobile person are welcomed by tourism industry because we are money also. We are clients, we are customers, you know. And that's why some people now say, hey, tourism over Canada, and especially over Quebec, is not right now in good shape. Economically, the tourism industry has some problems in Quebec particularly. So those people involved in tourism has to find out new solutions to that problem of tourism. And so they think now that one of these solutions is about accessibility and about the fact that they must better serve their clients.
We'll talk further with Alain Charette later on in the program. The CBC is preparing to release an internal report which contains 41 recommendations for achieving employment equity for disabled persons, women, and minorities. However, just announced budget cutbacks will have an impact on the timetable of those recommendations. Francis Trant, coordinator of employment equity for the CBC, says it's too early to tell just how the cutbacks will affect the report. Trant suggested, however, that implementation could be delayed and job targets lowered as a result of the budget cuts. Among the recommendations, increasing the percentage of disabled employees from 1% to 2.6%. and making all CBC buildings and work sites accessible. Here's an update on our story last week involving research on nerve regeneration. Montreal is going to become a center for a network on nerve regeneration research. The network involves scientists at 14 Canadian universities who are looking for ways to reverse spinal cord injuries and cure diseases that affect the nervous system. Lynn Herzig has this report.
The federal government has set up a research network, a network to link 100 scientists across Canada at universities and in private sector laboratories. They'll have $25 million to work with. Their priority will be to identify the substances that can keep injured nerve cells from dying and that can stimulate their regrowth. They say the key is to decode our nervous system, those 200 billion nerve cells, each of which makes thousands of connections.
We don't have the blueprints. We have to determine what the blueprints are, how this system is wired, and then attempt to improve, to restore its function.
The research network will be based at McGill and the Université de Montréal. Lynn Herzig, CBC News, Montreal.
A deaf couple in Vancouver is suing the provincial government for not providing interpreters in the delivery room when their twin daughters were born. John and Linda Warren say their rights were violated. They say the birth of their daughters, prematurely, was frightening because they couldn't communicate with the doctors. No other province has a program to pay for medical interpreters for the deaf. At least 2 Edmonton residents with psychiatric disabilities have killed themselves in the past few weeks while waiting to be admitted to hospital. The Canadian Mental Health Association says both were forced to wait weeks for a hospital bed while repeatedly seeking treatment for suicidal tendencies. Brian Bechtel, the association's director in Alberta, contends the deaths are a tragic end result of the low priority Alberta places on mental health services. A total of 29 psychiatric beds have been shut down in the Edmonton area in the last 18 months. Wheel-Trans, the Metro Toronto transit service for disabled persons, is threatened by severe cutbacks. Metro Chairman Alan Tonks has proposed cutting $1.7 million from the Wheel-Trans budget. If the proposal is accepted, 140,000 Wheel-Trans rides will be lost. A member of Transaction, an advocacy group for accessible transit, called the move distressing. The dramatic increase in successful organ transplants in the past decade can be attributed to the new discoveries in anti-rejection drugs. Steve Gendel brings us this report on a drug called FK506.
27-year-old Jim Beadle suffered from a blood disorder that destroyed his liver. So here at UCLA, Jim got a liver transplant, in this case, as part of an experimental program using a new anti-rejection drug from Japan called FK506. For years, a drug called cyclosporin has been the drug that made transplants possible.
But cyclosporin has problems, including toxic side effects, especially to the kidneys. That's one of the reasons doctors are so interested in this new FK506.
It's 100 times more potent than cyclosporin. We haven't had any rejection. And the toxicities that have been reported, the kidney problems and some of the other problems, appear to be less than cyclosporin.
FK506 is derived from a fungus in Japan. In addition to controlling organ rejection, it may have antibiotic properties as well and may help control infection. Steve Gendel in Los Angeles for NBC News.
And that's this week's roundup of disability news. Coming up, a look at access and the tourism industry in Canada. Most people in the travel and tourism business in Canada couldn't care less about the needs of people with disabilities. This is very short-sighted, especially in these tough economic times. There are 3.25 million disabled people in Canada, and they have money to spend. And then there are all of those older people who don't consider themselves disabled, but who have trouble accessing buildings and transportation services because of mobility impairments. And no doubt the Canadian tourism industry is ignorant of the fact that 43 million Americans are disabled. According to a recent study, people with restricted physical mobility constitute a market of potential tourists that is in a state of rapid growth. The study was prepared by CAROL, the Association for the Development of Tourism for Handicapped People in Quebec. The study was the basis of a national conference on tourism and travel that CAROL held this week in Toronto. In a few minutes, we'll meet the president of CAROL, as well as the executive director of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, John Lawson. To set the scene, we're going to take a look at one hotel room that comes close to being a model of accessibility, something that the hotel industry can aim for. Now, this is one of the hotel's accessible bedrooms. I think the first feature here in the entranceway that I notice is a latch on the door handle as opposed to the conventional knob. And this is easier for people who don't have any grip strength. They can just go like that. They don't even need to grip. The next feature is the peepholes. There's one here at this level. And also one at this level for people in wheelchairs. They can see who's coming to the front door. And also the light switches on 2 different levels as well. Here's for people who are standing up and for the folks that are in wheelchairs. So let's go take a look at some of the other features. Here's a conventional closet with the clothes hanging bar up here and some hooks in the back. They've made a very inexpensive renovation by putting some clothes hooks at a lower level so people in wheelchairs could hang their clothes up on those ones. The one suggestion that I would make is that they split the difference at the height of the clothes hanging bar. Maybe make it a little more achievable for somebody in a wheelchair to hang up their clothes as well. Now, in the bathroom, they've done a very good job of renovating this place. And what's nice about this is that they've got the better lever faucets on the sink apparatus, so it's very easy to turn on and off instead of the conventional screw type. So if you've got limited hand movement, these are the best ones to use. And in the bathtub, I really like the bathtub because they've got a full sweeping set of grab bars all around the tub. They've also got a shower head that's removable, so you can take it down. If you're sitting in the tub, you can actually have a shower even sitting down in the tub. The nice feature about this tub is that they have an anti-scalding device on the hot water. So if you were paralyzed, you won't scald yourself if the water does get too hot. The other nice thing about the tub is that the soap dishes are on 2 different levels for people who are sitting down in the tub and also standing up to take a shower. Just inside the bathroom door, there's some inexpensive renovations to make this place a little more accessible for people in wheelchairs. First off is some bottle openers. There's a bottle opener at 2 levels, one at the high for people who are standing and for those in wheelchairs. The same with the light switches. A set down here for people in wheelchairs and a set up there for people who are standing. Another nice feature about this bathroom is that the toilet paper is really handy to the toilet, and that doesn't seem to happen in some renovated bathrooms I've been in. Another nice feature here is an emergency telephone line. If you're in trouble in the bathroom, just pick it up and the hotel operator will answer. One of the things that would be difficult to access in this bathroom is the electrical outlet. It's quite a bit of ways from the sink, and it would be difficult if you were in a wheelchair to plug in either your electric razor or a hairdryer. It would be tough. One of the nice things about this bathroom is that there's a good solid grab bar right next to the toilet. So if you're a person who wants to transfer out of a wheelchair onto the toilet seat, you got something really sturdy to grab onto to help you do that. Another nice thing for a person like me is, who has difficulty standing and sitting, is I got something to grab onto that's nice and sturdy as well to help me get on and off the toilet. The one thing that I would recommend is that they elevate the toilet seat, raise the toilet seat up a little bit, elevate it, and these kinds of elevated toilet seats are usually less than $100 to purchase. One last point about the bathroom, put in a non-slip surface, because it would be very difficult for me as a person getting out of the bathtub. It would be really easy for me to slip. The telephone has a flashing light bar in it, so a deaf person can know whether or not there's a telephone call coming in. And as well as there's a message bar here too. They can see the light flashing if there's a message in for them. The light switch on this bed lamp here is a little bit of a problem for somebody who had very little grip. What I would suggest they do is get a touch-sensitive switch in there, and they can be picked up at hardware stores for pretty inexpensively. If you're hungry and if you're a blind person, there's a nice Braille menu here for in-room dining, room service. And if you're a little more adventuresome, all of the restaurants here in the Sheraton Center have accessible dining rooms, and also all of their menus are in Braille. We've made some recommendations for change here, but I think this particular room is pretty good, and a lot of hoteliers from across the country could learn something from the Sheraton Center to make their facilities a little more accessible for disabled guests. People in the travel industry make all sorts of excuses for not accommodating people with mobility and other impairments. But one excuse they can't make is lack of information on what to do about making physical changes. There's tons of literature and professional advice available. For example, this catalog lists the manufacturers of all barrier-free products available. It can be obtained from the Barrier-Free Design Center in Toronto. The information is all on computer, and it's updated annually to include new products. It sells for $45. And here's another guide for owners of tourist establishments in Quebec. It was put together by Carol, whose president will meet after a commercial break. We're back with more about the big bucks tourist and travel operators can make from people with disabilities, if they're smart. The cost, as we showed in that visit to the hotel room, need not be all that big. Here's a partial list for travelers with restricted needs that were identified in a 1987 federal provincial study. Independent access to tourist facilities, things like ramps. Dignified access to services, please, no freight elevators. Removal of attitudinal barriers. There's no need to be patronizing. Awareness of individual service requirements. For example, Braille menus. Adequate ground transportation services within and between cities. In the study it presented in Toronto this week, the Association for the Development of Tourism for Handicapped People in Quebec, CAROL, states, people with restricted physical ability represent a potential market for the Canadian tourist industry. However, does tourism in its current form adequately meet the needs of this market? With me is the president of the board of CAROL, Alain Charette. Welcome to DNet, Mr. Charette.
Hi.
Well, does the tourism industry really meet the needs of this market?
In fact, they want to, but unfortunately, I think that they have a big problem about information in the tourism industry and also about training of their employees.
What have you gained by holding this national conference?
I think that maybe the first major point is the consultation within all Canada, about that. All the provinces were willing to be in Toronto and to talk about tourism.
Are disabled people welcomed by the tourist industry?
Yes, they are, because we represent some money for them. But as I said, the big problem is about information of accessible places everywhere, and also about training of the employees that are involved in the tourist industry.
Could you give us some idea about the potential that's out there?
That's a huge potential, because we're talking about people with restricted physical ability. So we're not only talking about disabled people, we're also talking about aging people, and we're also talking about people with temporary disabilities.
How do travel agencies assess the needs of people with disabilities and possibly make recommendations to people who are traveling across the country?
The recommendations they made are not enough, very accurate, because they need more information about the accessible places that already exist.
What is your organization doing to make sure that resort operators and people in the tourist industry have the kind of information that they can give people with disabilities who want to travel?
We try to send them now information. We have a kind of program of research to find out where are the accessible places over Quebec and over Canada.
How do we change the attitudes of people in the industry?
The way we think we can change attitudes in the industry is by a proper training. It's very, very important that the ignorance no longer exists.
Mr. Charette, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Joining us now from Ottawa is John Lawson. He's the Executive Director of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. Mr. Lawson, do you think the tourism industry takes this market seriously?
Oh, I think the tourism industry takes the market very seriously. The problem is with the pace, I guess, of modifying our products and services to meet the needs of the disabled traveler. Clearly, we have seen just through the aging population and rapidly increasing demand for services by the elderly as well as other elements of the disabled community. And we also notice that disabled people are being more assertive in getting out and trying to get out and around, and so that our industry is having to adapt to this market in a way that we haven't really had to do in years past.
What can people with disabilities do to get their message across?
I think it requires a lot of hard work by the associations and organizations representing that community to get out and deliver their message to the tourism industry, to the transportation suppliers, to the hotel sector, to theaters, operators of various kinds of attractions that may be of interest. It's really a lobbying job that has to be done. I think that governments can be encouraged to assist in that direction, and I think they are doing that in some provinces. But again, as I say, it's like anything else. You have to make your voice heard.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. John Lawson is the Executive Director of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. There's information available on accommodations that are accessible. For example, if you're going to Toronto, the Junior League of Toronto has just published this little booklet entitled Toronto with Ease. It was just brought up to date just recently. I feel like some Italian food after the show, so I'm going to go to a restaurant on Mount Pleasant, and here it is. I've got all the listings here. Nope, can't go there. The washrooms are 13 steps down, not accessible to me or to people in wheelchairs. And Carol has also published booklets and pamphlets that describe accommodations across the country. When we come back, we'll find out what this device is for. People with disabilities who lose bladder control have to use a bag which is strapped to the leg. If they also use a wheelchair and their disability prevents them from leaning forward, they have to rely on someone to come and empty the bag at scheduled times. Keeping to a timetable like that can definitely limit your independence. This little electric motor right here can make a big difference. It's mounted on the wheelchair footboard and activates a valve on the leg bag. A simple press of the switch empties the leg bag, eliminating the need for assistance. Terry LeBlanc is a quadriplegic. He designed the device to meet his own needs, and he's now selling it. Here he is describing the difference it has made to his independence.
You're not tied to your home. You're not tied to having to have an attendant drain your leg bag the 2 to 3 times a day that it's required. It's quite significant in that you're able to wander or venture further from home and be totally independent. We are dependent enough as it is on morning routines, for dressing and for meals. So this is just one extra thing that in our life that they're more independent with.
Now, some people would probably say this is kind of gross or kind of uncomfortable discussing these kinds of things. How do you deal with people's reaction towards this kind of technology if it's kind of negative?
Well, as far as using it during the day, nobody really notices that I'm using it. If I'm out, say downtown, I just go curbside and I just push the button on my chair and they really don't even know what I'm doing. Or if I'm near a park, I'll just pull up parkside and I can be operating the unit and nobody really knows what's happening.
So it's very discreet.
Very discreet. It just goes down through the foot pedal and nobody knows what's happening.
Terry LeBlanc says the device is also good for his health because he can now drink more fluids than he could before, and that's good for all of us. And that brings us to the end of our show. As usual, we'd like to hear from our viewers. For example, have you had any experiences traveling across the country that you'd like to share with us? What do you think of our tourism industry? Do you have any tips for operators? We'll give you our address in a moment. We don't have time to read any letters this week. Sorry about that. By the way, when you do write us, please remember to include your complete mailing address, including postal or zip code. And for those of you that write to the Disabled Network, that's not the way that you call our program. It's the Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. That's the Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. Or fax us at area code 416-975-5636. People have been asking about Susan. She asked me to tell viewers that she's taking a break due to complications arising from her disability, and that she hopes to be back on the job at the beginning of the year. As some of you know, she has cystic fibrosis. All of us here wish her well. And one more thing. Next week, we will be talking to disabled people who are wanting to get beer advertisements off television. One thing we'll be asking, and we'd like your response between now and next week, is whether the Easter Seal Society should be taking money from a beer company. Look at this public service announcement and give us your reaction.
The cold has come, so soon they'll come to this place. Chase a puck, maybe chase a dream. But mostly, they'll come just to play. Every kid needs to play. To be a kid. Easter Seals delivers.
This season, Molson Canadian and Canadian Light will donate a portion of sales, $300,000, to Easter Seals.
If you're out this season, please take care.
So let us know what you think. See you next week. I'm Joe Coughlin. Hurry back, Susan.